Imagine waking up one morning to find your driveway blocked by a locked gate. No warning, no explanation. Just a cold metal barricade with a bold sign reading, Property of Oakage HOA. That's exactly what happened to me 3 months ago. But what they didn't realize was that I had been preparing for this moment 4 or 5 years. That gate, it wasn't a setback, it was a trigger. A trap I designed in case they ever crossed the line. And they walked right into it. Hey, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. I'm honestly curious, because what you're about to hear is the story of how one power-hungry HOA tried to steal my land and ended up losing far more than they bargained for. I've always been a planner. That trait served me well as a software engineer where precision, foresight, and strategic thinking were everything. My coworkers used to joke that I wrote code to solve problems before they even existed. Turns out that same mindset was exactly what I needed when the Oakage Homeowners Association set their sights on my property. I'm Alex Morgan. At 38, after years of careful saving and cramped apartment living, I finally bought the land I dreamed of. 5 acres on the outskirts of San Diego, undeveloped, pristine, and perfectly positioned, with a panoramic view of the Pacific Ocean. My plan was to build an energy-efficient home with a full workshop where I could pursue my passion projects away from the chaos of city life. What I didn't know when I purchased the property was that someone else had been coveting that ocean view long before I came along. Victoria Reynolds, widowed, wealthy, and wielding unchecked authority as president of the Oakage HOA, had been eyeing my land for years. A lifelong Bostonian with deep pockets and deeper biases, Victoria believed the exclusivity of Oakage was its most precious asset. And the idea of someone like me, a single middle-class tech guy developing land next to her curated enclave, was apparently unacceptable. Property values are the lifeblood of a community like ours, she once said during a recorded HOA meeting. I later reviewed. Translation. She was willing to do anything to keep people like me out, even if it meant bending, breaking, or outright ignoring the law. But Victoria didn't act alone. Her right hand was Harold Mitchell, a 62-year-old former corporate attorney who had made a career out of doing what powerful people told him. Harold wasn't evil, just weak. And in the hands of someone like Victoria, that weakness became dangerous. He provided the legal muscle she needed to mask her schemes with a thin veil of legitimacy. Completing the trio was Jennifer Lee, the 45-year-old HOA secretary and an ambitious local real estate agent. Jennifer was sharper than Harold and had her own motivations, mainly driven by profit. At first, she played along, but as things escalated, she started to realize just how far Victoria was willing to go. And that realization would spark a change of heart, one that would become pivotal later in the fight. I didn't know it yet, but this was more than a property dispute. It was about power manipulation and the danger of people who think the rules don't apply to them. And it was only just beginning. I first sensed trouble when an unexpected letter arrived inviting me to attend an Oakage HOA meeting to resolve boundary concerns. I replied politely, stating that since I wasn't a member of Oakage, their HOA had no jurisdiction over my land. That's when their friendly facade vanished. What followed was a coordinated and escalating campaign, clear as day, to anyone who'd ever dealt with bullies in suits. They wanted to force me to sell my property and at a steep discount. But Victoria had underestimated the wrong person. She thought I was just another holdout to steamroll, unaware that I had spent years developing security and countermeasure systems. My background in defense infrastructure gave me a unique understanding of how to spot pressure tactics and how to reverse them. One evening, I sat down with a box of old property records, curious to trace the land's ownership history. That's when I stumbled upon a familiar pattern. Victoria had done this before. Years earlier, she had used the same long-game approach to oust another landowner. Her strategy was simple but cruel, where you down with endless fines, delay your permits, sabotage your plans through local connections, and then swoop in with a lowball offer that felt like an escape route. But I had no intention of playing by her rules. "I'll let her think I'm losing," I muttered, flipping through the yellow documents. That's when I saw it, a line buried in a 1978 easement filing. A clause exempting my parcel from any future HOA jurisdiction due to an access agreement with the county. It wasn't just a loophole, it was a loaded cannon. Soon the campaign of harassment began in earnest. Every week brought new notices citing weed overgrowth on land I hadn't even cleared yet, fines for debris when nothing had been delivered, and warnings about unauthorized sheds that existed only in Victoria's imagination. All the letters came from the HOA's legal office, each more aggressive than the last. Then came Marco Sanchez, a building inspector in his 50s, with a fondness for smug smirks and vague threats. He started appearing weekly, always inspecting, always finding new issues. It didn't take long to confirm what I suspected: he was on Victoria's payroll. Each time I applied for a permit, it got lost, misfiled, or needs revision. Classic delay tactics. Still, I smiled, nodded, and thanked him for his time. I carefully filed every notice, documented every conversation, and saved every email. Victoria thought she was running the show. I was just letting her set the stage. During one particularly tense visit, Marco handed me a folder and said with a sneer, "You've got multiple compliance violations. It'll take time to sort, but I'm sure you'll get there." Eventually, "I appreciate the guidance," I replied, wearing my best defeated smile. As soon as he left, I called Olivia Bennett, an old friend from college, now working as a top-tier real estate attorney. "Olivia," I said, voice steady, "I need your help. It's time we dig deep into Victoria Reynolds, her little HOA empire, and any skeletons they've been hiding. I have a feeling we're about to find something big." The situation reached its boiling point at a community meeting where Victoria took the podium and launched into a public smear campaign against me. With all the pomp and confidence of a seasoned manipulator, she accused me of planning to build an unsightly industrial structure that would cripple property values across Oakage. To back her claim, she even presented a slideshow that included heavily photoshopped renderings of a cold metallic warehouse-looking building, supposedly based on my blueprints. The problem: I had never shared my plans with anyone. Not a single file, sketch, or draft had left my personal archives. Those images were pure fabrication. Victoria ended her performance with a grand flourish. "Mr. Morgan clearly has no regard for the aesthetic integrity of our beloved community. We cannot allow one selfish individual to dismantle what generations of stewardship have built." The audience murmured in concern. Some looked confused, a few nodded in support, and at the back of the room, my sister Rachel, a seasoned investigative journalist, quietly pressed record on her phone. As we exited the meeting, Rachel gripped my arm and whispered, "She just handed us a defamation case on a silver platter. That footage alone is worth weeks of litigation." But what neither of us knew at the time was that the rabbit hole went far deeper than Photoshop, blueprints, and personal attacks. Later that night, driven by frustration and curiosity, I dove back into my research. I wanted to know why Victoria was so obsessed with my land. It didn't make sense unless the HOA had more riding on this than just an inflated sense of neighborhood pride. That's when I discovered the real reason. Victoria had promised an expanded community pool and recreational center in her last campaign for HOA president. But to fulfill that promise, she needed more land than Oakage currently owned. My 5 acres weren't just desirable, they were essential, yet there was more. As I dug further into public land use records and old meeting minutes, I stumbled across a detail that changed everything. 15 years ago, a private investment group had made a bid to acquire parcels of undeveloped land in the area, including mine. One of the signatories on the deal, A.V. Reynolds, operating under a shell LLC. The group had failed to acquire the land back then, but Victoria had clearly not given up hope. To verify my suspicions, I tracked down George Coleman, a retired city council member who had been involved in land zoning decisions during Oakage's early days. George, a sharp-minded man in his 70s, met me on his porch with a folder of old maps and a lifetime's worth of insight. "Victoria," he scoffed, "she's been manipulating zoning ordinances since the day she set foot in this town. But this time she screwed up. See this line?" He pointed to a faded route that skirted the edge of my property. "It's an old public access road, never officially closed. Still on record as a right-of-way." I leaned in. "So legally I could restore it?" George grinned. "And there's not a thing the HOA can do about it." That changed everything. While Victoria was busy controlling the Oakage-facing entrance to my property, I would quietly reclaim that forgotten road and carve out a new access point one she couldn't touch. And to bait the trap, I'd leave the main gate right where she wanted it, fully visible and vulnerable. I wasn't just going to reclaim my land. I was going to expose Victoria's entire game for the fraud it was. And I would do it using the same strategy she tried to use on me: pressure, misdirection, and precision timing. Only this time she'd be the one walking straight into it. The decoy gate was more than just a visual prop. It was a tactical trap outfitted with a network of concealed cameras and motion sensors designed to document every illegal move the HOA made. It functioned as a high-tech honeypot collecting irrefutable evidence of their overreach. "This is dangerous, Alex," Olivia said cautiously after I walked her through the plan. "What if they escalate past blocking access? What if they vandalize your property, or worse, physically interfere with your work?" I gave her a measured nod, then turned my laptop toward her, showing the interface of my custom-built surveillance system. "That's what I'm counting on. Everything they do will be captured from multiple angles. Once we're done, there won't be a court in the state that can ignore what we've gathered." While I handled the physical side of the plan, Rachel dug deeper into Victoria Reynolds' past. Her findings confirmed what I had long suspected: Victoria wasn't just overzealous. She was deeply compromised. The expansion of the Oakage community pool wasn't merely an HOA project. It was tied to a secret deal she had struck with a private developer, one that had connections to her late husband's firm. Not only was it a financial conflict of interest, but she'd failed to disclose it to the HOA board, a major violation of governance rules. Over the next few weeks, I executed the plan with military precision. By day, I made deliberate attempts to access my land through the main entrance. I played the part of the frustrated landowner, frequently engaging with HOA reps and appearing to reach the end of my rope. By night, I and a small crew of trusted contractors worked quietly to clear the neglected public access route on the opposite end of the property. We installed hidden cameras and natural cover tree trunks, faux rocks even within the ornate details of the decoy gate's fake keypad. Everything was documented. "The system is up and running," I told Olivia one evening. "It's time to wait." The wait wasn't long. 3 mornings later, I arrived at the front of my property to find a brand new heavy-duty metal gate welded into place. A bright red sign neatly painted declared private property of Oakage HOA. No trespassing. Bingo. What Victoria didn't realize was that while she thought she was locking me out, she had just walked straight into my evidence trap. Every inch of her operation had been recorded: the delivery truck, the men in HOA polos, the installation process, even the moment they welded the lock. I pulled my car to a stop just short of the barrier, and for the benefit of the cameras, jumped out with an exaggerated look of shock and frustration. "What the hell?" I yelled, rattling the lock and pacing in front of the gate. I immediately dialed the police, knowing exactly how they would respond, but needing the interaction for the paper trail. Officer Williams showed up about 20 minutes later. He stepped out of his cruiser with a side clipboard in hand and the vaguely annoyed look of someone stuck doing the bare minimum. "Looks like a property dispute," he mumbled after I explained the situation. "Civil matter. You'll need to talk to the HOA or get a lawyer involved. But this is my land. They put up a gate without my consent," I said, just angry enough to sell the scene. "Isn't that trespassing?" "At the very least, vandalism." Williams shrugged. "Unless you have proof they did it and didn't have the right, we can't do much. I'll file a report, though." He handed me a case number and left, none the wiser that his visit had just become another piece of the evidence puzzle, exactly as I had planned. What I hadn't anticipated was just how quickly Victoria would show up to gloat. Less than an hour after Officer Williams left, a sleek black Mercedes rolled up beside my truck. Out stepped Victoria, wearing oversized sunglasses and a pastel blazer, followed closely by Harold, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. They were dressed like they'd just come from a country club brunch, not like people in the middle of a land dispute. "Mr. Morgan," Victoria called out in a voice that dripped with condescension disguised as courtesy. "Is there some sort of issue?" I turned to face them, doing my best to suppress the grin tugging at the corners of my mouth. They were falling into my trap perfectly. "Yes, there is an issue. Someone installed a locked gate on the only visible entrance to my property." "Do you know anything about that?" Victoria's smile was ice cold. "Oh, that gate, it's on Oakage HOA property. You see, there's been a recent boundary adjustment. We've sent you notices about joining our covenant community." "Boundary adjustment," I said, raising an eyebrow. "You can't just redraw maps and claim land that doesn't belong to you." Harold stepped forward nervously, clutching a leather folder like a shield. "Actually, Mr. Morgan, based on our latest surveys and some historical easement documents we recently uncovered, that access point appears to fall within Oakage's jurisdiction. We're simply securing our perimeter. So let me get this straight, I said, ensuring the hidden mics picked up every word. You're saying I can't access my own property unless I agree to join your HOA. Victoria gave a tight, practiced smile. That's one way of looking at it, but we prefer to see it as extending you an invitation into our community. If our guidelines are too rigid for your plans, we're prepared to make a generous purchase offer. After all, land without access holds limited value. She handed me an envelope and I took it knowing exactly what was inside. And if I don't accept, her eyes sparkled with smug confidence, then you'll own a pretty piece of land you can't reach or build on. The decision is yours, Mr. Morgan. They left with the confidence of people who believed they had closed the deal. After their car disappeared down the road, I opened the envelope and chuckled. Just as expected, the offer inside was laughably low, barely half of the property's market value. I immediately called Olivia. They walked right into it. I've got clear footage of Victoria admitting the gate was meant to pressure me into joining the HOA or selling below value. That's coercion, plain and simple, Olivia replied, her tone tight with excitement. When do we go public? Not yet, I said, watching the empty road where Victoria's Mercedes had vanished. She thinks I'm considering the offer. We've got a meeting scheduled tomorrow. I want to see how far she'll go. What Victoria and Harold didn't know was that while we spoke, a licensed survey crew brought in under the radar was already verifying my property lines and mapping the long-forgotten public access road George had told me about. What they found wasn't just validation of my boundary, it was something even bigger. Something buried in a decades-old municipal file that would flip the power dynamic entirely. And Victoria. She was about to find out just how dangerous it was to underestimate a man with blueprints, backup files, and a decade's worth of contingency plans. The meeting with Victoria was scheduled for 2 p.m. at the Oakage Clubhouse, a calculated move on her part. The building was designed to impress with polished marble floors, vaulted ceilings, and an overabundance of chandeliers. The message was clear, this was her domain. I arrived at 1:45 wearing jeans and a faded hoodie, carefully curated to look like a man cornered into submission. Victoria predictably kept me waiting. When she finally entered at 2:20, flanked by Harold and a third man I hadn't seen before, she radiated smugness. No apology, just that cool, practiced smile. Mr. Morgan, thank you for being reasonable, she said, taking her seat at the head of a massive oak table and gesturing for me to sit across. This is Brian Cooper, our head of security. He'll be implementing the arrangements discussed today. Brian, stocky and stone-faced, looked more like hired muscle than someone managing neighborhood patrols. I logged every detail, body language, tone, who said what. The watch on my wrist wasn't just keeping time, it was recording everything in high definition. I reviewed your offer, I said, sounding weary. Honestly, it's less than what I paid for the land. That's hard to accept. Victoria tilted her head, all faux sympathy. Property without usable access is tricky, Mr. Morgan. Under these conditions, I assure you this is more than fair. What followed was an hour-long charade. I raised objections. She deflected. I asked questions. She reframed them. Harold spoke only when spoken to and looked increasingly uneasy. Brian remained silent, arms crossed, occasionally glancing toward the hallway. It was a performance for their benefit, and I played my part to perfection. Eventually, I leaned forward and sighed. I need time to consider. It's a lot. Of course, Victoria said, her voice sugary. Take the weekend, but do be aware the offer expires Monday. After that, your options become extremely limited. I stood slowly, nodded, and left head low, shoulders slumped. Let them believe I was broken. Outside, I walked to my truck, started it, and turned down the street, but not toward the HOA gate. Instead, I looped around, took a county-maintained access road, and veered off onto the path George Coleman had confirmed weeks earlier. The old public access road, forgotten by most but still legally valid, had been completely cleared and reinforced. 10 minutes later, I pulled onto my property through the back. No cameras, no patrols, no smug HOA interference. Just open land, clear skies, and an opportunity. That week, I worked nonstop. Materials were delivered at night or early morning, all through the hidden road. Foundation prep began. My crew, discreet, experienced, and highly motivated, moved quickly. While the HOA ramped up its pressure, I was already 3 steps ahead. Victoria, believing she had boxed me in, doubled down. The HOA hired a private security firm to monitor the front gate 24/7. These guards had been instructed to block my entry, an action that Olivia was already preparing to challenge in court as unlawful detention. Meanwhile, Victoria continued sending aggressive legal threats, some veiled, others blatant. Letters arrived daily, each more ridiculous than the last. They claimed violations for unauthorized vehicle access, disturbance of community landscaping, and even spiritual damage to community morale. Let her play her game, because by the time Monday arrived, I wouldn't just be rejecting her offer. I'd be unveiling a fully operational construction site, a legal team with a federal injunction pending, and a story that was about to become very public very fast. Victoria even went so far as to file falsified documents with the county recorder's office, claiming partial ownership of my land through obscure and outdated boundary claims. It was a desperate attempt to assert legal standing, and it didn't go unnoticed. Jennifer Lee, the HOA secretary, who had grown increasingly uneasy with Victoria's tactics, began quietly documenting everything herself. She had a gut feeling this was about to spiral into something far beyond the scope of a neighborhood dispute. Things escalated quickly when, frustrated by my radio silence and apparent absence from the front gate, Victoria instructed her security team to conduct an on-site inspection of my property. In truth, this was outright trespassing. My hidden cameras recorded every step as Brian Cooper and two uniformed guards cut the very lock they had installed and crossed onto my land unauthorized and fully armed with clipboards, cameras, and a blatant disregard for legality. They roamed for nearly 2 hours, photographing everything and marking stakes in the ground as if conducting an official assessment. But they weren't prepared for what they found. When Brian stumbled upon the early stages of my construction, freshly poured foundation lines, supplies covered with tarps, and signs of recent excavation, he pulled out his phone and called Victoria. My system captured the audio with perfect clarity. "Mrs. Reynolds, we've got a problem," he said. "There's active construction here. Someone's been working, and it's recent. I don't know how they're getting in, but it's happening." Though her reply wasn't audible, Brian's reaction spoke volumes. His posture stiffened. His tone turned cold. After ending the call, he instructed his men to damage some of the equipment. They slashed a tarp, knocked over surveying markers, and unplugged my electrical battery pack, all of it caught on video, each act more incriminating than the last. That same evening, I received a call from Detective David Torres. A well-respected officer known for his integrity and independence, he had been reviewing the materials I'd provided over the previous weeks. "Mr. Morgan," he said, "I've reviewed everything. We're no longer looking at just civil infractions. Between the forged documents, surveillance footage, and the targeted harassment, we're likely dealing with criminal conspiracy. I'd like to meet with you in person." Meanwhile, Jennifer Lee reached her breaking point. She created a burner email and contacted me anonymously. "I can't keep quiet anymore. I've saved everything: meeting notes, emails, internal memos. I'll hand it all over when you're ready." It was the final puzzle piece. Victoria believed she was tightening her grip on me and the land, but in reality, every step she took only deepened the legal pit she was digging for herself. She still didn't know about the public access road. She had no clue that I'd been quietly building while she watched the wrong gate. Then came the reveal. At exactly 7:00 a.m. the next morning, the sound of hammers echoed across the hillside. My crew was hard at work erecting framing along the cleared lot. I stood near the edge, clipboard in hand, when Victoria's black Mercedes came flying down the hill and skidded to a stop. She bolted from the driver's seat, eyes wide with fury, hair unraveling in the breeze. "What is the meaning of this?" she screamed. "Brian, how did he get in?" Harold's car pulled in behind her. When he stepped out and saw me standing tall on my own property, his face went pale. Unlike Victoria, he immediately understood what this meant. They'd lost control. And worse, they'd left a trail of evidence leading straight to criminal charges. "Victoria," he murmured gently, tugging at her sleeve. "We should discuss this privately." "There's nothing to discuss," she snapped, yanking her arm away. "He's trespassing on his own land. That's impossible." I allowed myself a calm, satisfied smile. "Not impossible at all when you understand the history of this land. While you were busy placing your illegal gate at what you assumed was my only entrance, I was quietly restoring the original public access road on the eastern edge of the property, the one clearly marked on the county's original 1952 survey maps. I held up a laminated copy of that very survey. Harold's face shifted from tension to outright dread the moment he recognized what he was looking at. Victoria ripped the document from my hand, her eyes darting across the clearly labeled public right-of-way, slicing through the corner of my land. "This is a forgery," she spat, but the tremble in her voice exposed her growing panic. "I think the county clerk's office would disagree," I said evenly. "So would the state transportation department, which still lists that road as public never closed, just forgotten. Until now." Brian Cooper arrived, then flanked by two of his uniformed guards. They paused, taking in the tension in the air as Victoria shoved the document into Brian's hands. "Remove these people at once," she barked. "They're trespassing on HOA land." Brian reviewed the survey, then looked up at her, clearly shaken. "If this is correct, Mrs. Reynolds, then this isn't HOA land, and we don't have any legal authority to remove them." Victoria's expression twisted, her voice losing its smoothness. I took a step forward, raising my voice just enough so the audio on all my hidden microphones would be crisp and clear. "Just so we're all on the same page," I said calmly, "this entire encounter is being recorded from multiple angles. Any attempt to interfere with my crew or my property would be considered trespassing and obstruction. I've already filed a report with Detective Torres regarding the previous vandalism. You're welcome to test the boundaries of criminal law further, but I wouldn't recommend it." Harold wiped his brow and finally found the nerve to step in. "Victoria, please. Let's not do anything rash." Then turning to me, he tried to regain his lawyerly tone. "Mr. Morgan, perhaps we could all agree to de-escalate and revisit this matter with legal representation present. A mediated conversation may be—" "There's nothing left to discuss," I interrupted. "The time for meetings is over. Your HOA illegally blocked my access, filed falsified documents, vandalized my equipment, and attempted to force me into a fraudulent sale. I'm building my house here on my land using a public road your HOA president conveniently overlooked in her quest for control." Victoria's eyes blazing with desperation made the critical mistake I'd been waiting for. "Brian," she snapped, her voice cracking under pressure. "Shut down that construction now. I don't care how. Do whatever it takes." Brian took a nervous half-step back. "Ma'am, I can't legally—" "I'm not paying you to make excuses," she shouted. "Either handle the situation or find yourself another job." And just like that, it was over. She had said the quiet part out loud, an explicit command to commit an illegal act shouted in front of witnesses and recorded from every angle. Victoria Reynolds had just handed me the final nail for the coffin she'd spent months building. Brian, displaying far more common sense than his employer, shook his head and took a step back. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Reynolds. My company provides security, not criminal services. We're done here." He turned to his men, gesturing for them to leave. Without another word, the guards retreated to their vehicle, leaving Victoria isolated, fuming, and utterly without support. Harold stepped between Victoria and the fence, his back now to me. "We're leaving right now," he muttered, his voice low but firm. "Before you say anything else that ends up in a deposition." He placed a hand on her elbow and practically pulled her toward the car. She resisted for a moment, hissing something inaudible, but Harold whispered urgently in her ear until she finally relented. As their vehicle pulled away, I caught Harold glancing back at me through the passenger side window. His face was pale, not with rage, but with realization. He finally understood they hadn't just picked the wrong fight. They'd walked straight into a trap that had been months, even years in the making. The next morning, Victoria and Harold were each served with official legal complaints at their homes. The suit named not just them, but also the Oakage HOA and Brian Cooper's security company as co-defendants. The charges were extensive: trespassing, vandalism, harassment, fraud, and conspiracy. Attached to the filing was a trove of evidence, video footage, photographs, forged paperwork, audio recordings, and detailed witness statements, including a bombshell affidavit from Jennifer Lee. Her insider account of HOA meetings, property negotiations, and illegal directives would prove to be the backbone of the entire case. Later that day, a local news van rolled up to the Oakage community gates. The reporter, a sharp-looking young woman with a live mic, stood beneath the HOA sign as she launched into the lead story of the 6 o'clock broadcast: prestigious HOA accused of criminal conspiracy to seize private land. It didn't take long for the story to spread beyond the neighborhood. Within 24 hours, it was all over local media. Victoria's carefully cultivated reputation and Oak Ridge's exclusivity was in freefall. 2 days after the story broke, Jennifer Lee called me. Her tone had changed. The ambitious, confident real estate agent was gone. What I heard now was cautious, but resolute. "Alex, I found something," she said, her voice hushed over the phone. "This goes deeper than the HOA. Victoria isn't just after your land for community expansion. This is personal and much bigger." We met that evening at a quiet coffee shop well outside city limits. Jennifer arrived disguised in a hoodie and sunglasses, nervously scanning the room as she sat down across from me. "I'm taking a huge risk," she said. "Victoria has connections, and I've already gotten warnings to keep my mouth shut." "You're doing the right thing," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Whatever you know, I'll protect your name as much as I can, but I need to see what you found." She slid a plain folder across the table. "These are internal communications between Victoria and Clearwater Development, the company her husband worked for before he died. They've been planning a luxury resort complex for years. Your land is the lynchpin. It's the only parcel with direct access to both the coastal view and the main access road. Without it, the entire project collapses." I opened the folder. There they were: development blueprints, investment models, private emails discussing acquisition strategies. It was all laid bare. "This is a multi-million-dollar project," I said, stunned. "Why not just make me an offer before I bought the land?" Jennifer sighed. "Because you weren't supposed to buy it. They had a deal lined up with the previous owner. But he died unexpectedly, and the land went to auction. You were the wild card, and Victoria's been trying to erase that mistake ever since." "That's where it gets personal," Jennifer said, tapping a date on one of the documents. "Your land originally belonged to Victoria's husband's family. During a financial downturn 15 years ago, they were forced to sell it. Edward Reynolds never forgave himself. He always intended to buy it back when they recovered financially, but he passed away before he could. Victoria, on his deathbed, promised she would get it back and turn it into something lasting in his name. So when you unknowingly bought it, you didn't just interfere with her plans, you became the person standing in the way of her keeping that promise." I leaned back in my seat, taking it all in. The hostility, the relentless pressure, the underhanded tactics, it all made a twisted kind of sense now. This wasn't just about HOA politics or development. It was emotional, deeply personal, emotional and profitable. Jennifer corrected, her voice firm. "Don't think for a second that her motivations are purely sentimental. According to the documents I found, Victoria stands to receive a $2 million consulting payout from Clearwater if the resort is approved, plus a percentage of future profits. The community pool was never the goal. It was a convenient lie to sell her vision to the HOA board." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed. A text from Olivia lit up the screen. "Reynolds just filed for emergency injunction. Claims your access road is unsafe. Hearing tomorrow 9 a.m. Be ready." So that was Victoria's next play. She couldn't risk me finishing construction before the lawsuit was resolved. If I completed my home, her entire development plan would unravel. She was throwing every legal roadblock she could at me, hoping to run out the clock. What neither of us expected was the wild card who showed up the next morning at the courthouse. As Olivia and I stepped through security, we were approached by a tall man in a charcoal gray suit, early to mid-30s, clean-cut with a nervous energy beneath his composed demeanor. "Mr. Morgan, I'm Thomas Reynolds, Victoria's son. I think we need to talk." We stepped aside to a quiet hallway. He spoke quickly but earnestly. "I flew in from Boston after a colleague forwarded me a news clip about the lawsuit. I had no idea what my mother was doing. My dad always talked about that land. Yes, but this..." He shook his head. "This is not what he would have wanted." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "What does your mother say about all this?" "She refuses to talk to me," Thomas sighed. "She says I don't understand, that I'm disrespecting his legacy. But I've seen the Clearwater documents. This isn't about honoring my father. It's about control. It always has been." Before we could continue, a bailiff appeared and called our case. Inside the courtroom, Victoria's legal team wasted no time. Her attorney painted a dramatic picture, arguing that my use of the unmaintained and potentially hazardous access road posed significant risks, both environmental and public safety. He demanded that all construction be halted immediately, pending a lengthy investigation that would conveniently stall my progress indefinitely. When it was our turn, Olivia rose with calm, deliberate authority. She presented documentation showing I had received all necessary permits for the roadwork and construction. She submitted inspection reports from the county dated just days prior, confirming the road was fully compliant with safety and environmental codes. Then, with perfect timing, she handed the judge a letter from the county zoning commissioner, affirming that the road, despite being long forgotten, was legally recognized and had never been decommissioned. Victoria's lawyer tried to object, but the judge cut him off. "You're asking me to halt a legally permitted project based on vague safety concerns when the relevant authorities have already certified compliance, motion denied." Victoria didn't even try to hide her shock. For the first time, she looked rattled. And I knew we had just won the first real battle in a war she thought she had already won. The judge, an older woman known throughout the district for her no-nonsense rulings and disdain for frivolous litigation, didn't waste time handing down her decision. "The request for emergency injunction is denied," she declared, fixing Victoria's attorney with a hard stare. Furthermore, the court finds the claims raised in Mr. Morgan's affidavit to be both credible and concerning. The defendants are hereby ordered to refrain from any further attempts to obstruct, delay, or interfere with access to or construction on the plaintiff's property until the matter is resolved at trial. It was a blow Victoria hadn't anticipated, and one that signaled the tide had decisively turned. As we exited the courtroom, Olivia and I paused just long enough to witness Thomas confronting his mother in the hallway. Their body language was unmistakable. His was sharp, accusatory, hands gesturing firmly as he leaned in. Hers was closed off, defensive, arms crossed, head turning side to side, as if trying to escape the reality unraveling in front of her. Eventually, they stepped aside, disappearing into a side room, where the volume of their voices, though muffled, betrayed the heat of the conversation. "That's something she didn't plan for," Olivia said under her breath. "Her own son going public. That might do more damage than any court order." And she was right. Later that evening, Jennifer called with a stunned tone in her voice. "Alex, you're not going to believe this. There was a special emergency meeting of the Oakage HOA board today. Thomas showed up uninvited and aired everything. He brought the Clearwater development documents, questioned her about the forged deeds, the construction, sabotage, everything." She snapped. Full meltdown. She tried to justify it all, said she was honoring her husband's legacy. Then she broke down and admitted that she ordered the security team to damage your equipment and block your access. I sat in silence, letting that sink in. She admitted to everything I asked slowly. "Every single thing," Jennifer confirmed. "The board's in full panic. Some of them are already talking about resigning to escape liability. Others want to dissolve the HOA entirely." That was it. The trap had snapped shut. Not only had Victoria's schemes been fully exposed, but the broader corruption within the Oakage HOA was now under scrutiny. And with Jennifer's paper trail, Thomas's testimony, and Victoria's own confession, the civil case was nearly a guaranteed win, and the possibility of criminal charges was all but assured. Still, something didn't feel finished. Something unresolved. The next morning, I received an invitation to a private meeting from Thomas. I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe overlooking the coastline, neutral ground. "Thank you for coming," Thomas said as we sat across from each other. "I want to start by saying that if you move forward with the lawsuit and press charges, I understand. My mother's behavior was indefensible." He looked tired, older than he had 2 days earlier, like the emotional weight of years of family illusion had come crashing down. "I'm curious," I said, leaning forward. "What do you hope to accomplish by meeting me now?" Thomas opened a worn leather folio and passed a bundle of papers across the table. "These are my father's personal letters and business notes from the years before he died. I thought you should see them. He wasn't the man my mother built him up to be, not in the way she claimed. Yes, he regretted selling the land, but not because of any sentimental promise. It was just a business loss to him. There was no deathbed request, no vow to get it back. That story, she made it up to justify her obsession." I flipped through the documents. Edward Reynolds' handwriting described failed investments, difficult decisions, and a surprising amount of philosophical acceptance about the land sale. It was clear there was no mention of legacy or promises or unfinished dreams. "So the foundation for all this," I said slowly, "the narrative she's used to justify everything she's done, it's fiction." Thomas nodded, his voice heavy with disappointment. "It is. And I think my father would have been horrified to know what she's done in his name. He was ambitious, yes, but he played fair. He valued respect for the law. He never would have condoned this. And with that, the last illusion crumbled. This wasn't just a story of power or property. It was a story of obsession, rewritten history, and the destruction caused when someone blurs the line between loyalty and delusion. Victoria arrived precisely on time, her trademark air of authority slightly dimmed by the fallout of recent events. She paused when she spotted her son already seated at the table, but after a brief moment of visible tension, she composed herself and took the last open seat. Harold Mitchell trailed behind, looking haggard and defeated, his tie slightly askew and his hands trembling. Jennifer Lee entered quietly and took a chair off to the side, distancing herself from Victoria without making a statement. Olivia, who had been reviewing some paperwork across the room, moved to sit beside me just as Victoria cleared her throat to speak. I agreed to this meeting because Thomas believes we may find a way to avoid further escalation, she said, her voice carefully measured. While I still believe my intentions were rooted in preserving Oak Ridge's integrity, I will concede that certain actions may have been misinterpreted. I let out a short laugh, unable to hide my amusement at her refusal to admit wrongdoing. Mrs. Reynolds, let's skip the euphemisms, I replied evenly. Here's the reality. I have video evidence, photographs, sworn testimony, and official records proving trespass, property damage, forged documents, and a clear pattern of harassment. The district attorney is currently reviewing the evidence for criminal prosecution. My civil lawsuit names you the HOA board and the security firm. Your personal liability is significant. Insurance doesn't cover criminal conduct. So unless you plan to liquidate your estate, I suggest we be honest about the gravity of the situation. Harold visibly flinched. Victoria's face remained stone, though I noticed a subtle tick in her jaw. What is it you want, Mr. Morgan? She asked with icy formality. Do you want Oak Ridge dismantled? My reputation destroyed? Do you want to see me hauled into court like a common criminal? I don't want revenge, I said calmly. I want what I've always wanted, to build my home and live in peace. Everything that followed was the result of your actions, not mine. Thomas leaned forward, placing his hands firmly on the table. I've spent the last several days going through everything, every document, every recording. There's no gray area here, Mother. You broke the law, and you did it to protect a narrative that never existed. Dad never asked you to do this. Victoria's tightly held composure finally cracked. Her voice rose in a strained pitch. That land was supposed to be our family's legacy. No, Thomas said gently but firmly. It was land that Dad accepted losing. You made it into something it wasn't. A thick silence filled the room. Victoria's shoulders drooped ever so slightly. For the first time, she looked truly lost, not defeated by me, but by the realization that everything she had fought for was a story she had told herself. Thomas turned back to me. I've been in touch with Clearwater Development. They're prepared to make you a formal offer well above market value. All legal, transparent, no pressure. They just want to move forward professionally, and they'll respect your decision either way. I nodded slowly, absorbing his words. And if I say no, they'll walk away, Thomas said without hesitation. You have my word. I told them if they tried anything unethical, I'd personally see the deal fall apart. It was the kind of resolution I hadn't expected. I'd fought to protect my land, and now I had the upper hand. But the truth was, the last few months had left scars. The dream I once had of watching sunsets in peace was now entangled in memories of conflict and deceit. Every brick I laid would carry a shadow of what it took to get there. I'm willing to hear the offer, I said at last, but whether I accept it or not, there are other issues that must be resolved. Olivia leaned forward and took over, outlining our conditions clearly: a formal public apology from Victoria and the entire HOA board, full reimbursement for all my expenses, including legal fees, immediate removal of the illegal gate, and Victoria's resignation from her leadership role on the board. In exchange, I would drop the civil lawsuit and agree not to pursue criminal charges. Harold, visibly relieved, jumped at the opportunity. Speaking for the board, he said, I believe these terms are reasonable and acceptable. Victoria opened her mouth to protest, but Thomas placed a firm hand on her forearm. Mother, enough. You've done enough damage. This ends today. For the next hour, we discussed the finer details, specific wording of the settlement, the timeline for the gate's removal, and the structure of the public apology. Victoria sat in silence through most of it, a hollow shell of the controlling figure she had once been. Where once she had wielded power like a weapon, now she was merely enduring the consequences of her actions, powerless to stop them. 3 days later, we gathered again, this time at the offices representing the HOA. The Clearwater Development executives presented their revised proposal, nearly 3 times what I had paid for the land. It was an extraordinary offer, more than enough for me to purchase a larger property farther up the coast with even better ocean views, and most importantly, no history of conflict or bitterness attached to it. After thorough discussion with Olivia, I decided to accept. Victoria signed the settlement agreement last. Her signature was fluid, her expression unreadable. Whatever emotions she might have felt in that moment, anger, regret, pride swallowed whole, none of them showed. The final version of the agreement not only included everything we had demanded, but also introduced reforms to restructure the HOA's power so that no one could ever abuse it as she had. It was ironic, really. In her attempt to secure a legacy, she had helped create one, just not the one she imagined. After the paperwork was finalized, Jennifer approached me discreetly. "I've resigned from the board," she said quietly. "I'm launching my own firm, one that values transparency and ethics. I wanted to thank you for fighting back, for not letting people like her win." "Sometimes it takes a little chaos to shake people awake," I replied. "Best of luck. I really mean that. The last person to speak with me that day was Thomas. I know this isn't how you pictured your future," he said sincerely. "But I hope you're content with how it ended. It's not what I planned," I said, glancing out the office window. "But I've learned over the years that the best designs aren't the ones that resist every threat. They're the ones that can adapt to change." That principle saved me more than once. As I stepped outside into the afternoon sun, I turned briefly to glance toward the distant silhouette of Oakage. Its immaculate gates shone in the light, no longer imposing, no longer a symbol of power. Just another gate to just another place. Sometimes the greatest win isn't in beating your enemy. It's in reclaiming your peace, rewriting the rules, and watching the battlefield disappear beneath your feet, transformed. Victoria set a trap for me, convinced she could manipulate the outcome. But she never imagined that the trap could swing shut on her instead. And in that poetic reversal, I found the kind of resolution that no amount of money or land could ever truly match. This story is a powerful reminder that standing your ground against injustice, no matter how well-funded or intimidating the opposition may be, can make all the difference. In today's world where powerful institutions sometimes abuse their authority, it's crucial to document everything, know your rights, and build a support system of honest professionals. Whether you're dealing with property disputes, workplace bullying, or personal attacks, remember this: preparation, integrity, and persistence are your strongest defenses. Don't be afraid to speak up, to gather evidence, and to call out wrongdoing, even if you feel alone at first. Because sometimes the truth doesn't just protect you, it transforms the entire system.